1431, a court of churchmen sentenced a 19-year-old girl to be burned alive. They had every credential: bishops, theologians, doctors of canon law from the University of Paris, and they were wrong about her on every single count. 25 years later, the church reopened the trial and struck down every word of it. 500 years after that, she was raised to the altars as a saint. Her name was Joan, and before the world ever called her a heroine, she was something the modern man has nearly forgotten how to be: a soul that feared God more than it feared death. She was born around 1412 in Domrémy, a farming village on the edge of a France that was bleeding to death. The Hundred Years' War had ground on for the generations. The English held the north. The rightful heir, the Dauphin, Charles, was uncrowned and half broken. To be French and poor in those years was to be prey. Joan could not read. She could not write. She could sew, and she could pray. And at about 13 years old, she began to hear what she would later testify were voices. And she named them without flinching: St. Michael the Archangel, St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Margaret of Antioch. According to her own testimony, they told her to do two impossible things: drive the English from France and bring the Dauphin to be crowned at Reims. Sit with how insane that sounded. A teenage peasant girl claiming heaven had handed her a military campaign. She walked to the nearest garrison at Vaucouleurs and told the captain. He laughed her out of the room. She came back. He sent her away. She came back again, and something in the steadiness of her finally moved him. He gave her an escort and sent her across enemy country to the Dauphin. She did not have an argument. She had obedience, and obedience, when it does not blink, is its own kind of authority. In the spring of 1429, she rode to the relief of Orléans, a city that had been choked by siege for over half a year. The professional soldiers there were hard men, and they did not take orders from girls. Within days, they were following her. The first thing she did was not tactical. It was moral. She drove the camp prostitutes out. She ordered the men to confession. She told them to stop the blasphemy, that men who wanted heaven to fight for them had better stop cursing heaven. And then she led them to the walls. In 9 days, a siege that had held for months collapsed. She took an arrow through the shoulder, pulled it out herself, and went back to the line. By July, the Dauphin was crowned King Charles VII in the cathedral at Reims, exactly as she had said, and Joan stood near the altar holding her banner. When they asked her later why her banner had been given the place of honor, she answered, "It had borne the burden. It was right that it should have the honor." She never claimed the victory. She gave it to God and to the men who bled for it. Remember that. It comes back. The crown was won, and then the politics began. The king grew cautious. The court grew jealous. In 1430, Joan was captured at Compiègne, sold to the Burgundians, and handed over to the English. And the English had a problem only her destruction could solve. If Joan was genuine, then Charles was the true king. But if Joan could be branded a witch, a heretic, a fraud, then the crown she was won poisoned. So they did not try her as a prisoner of war. They tried her in a church court at Rouen under a bishop named Pierre Cauchon, a man sought and paid for by the English crown. She had no lawyer, no advocate. She could not read the charges. One illiterate teenage girl against the assembled doctors of the age, and the verdict written before the first question. And still, she answered them. They set a trap. Do you know if you are in the grace of God? Say yes, and you are guilty of the sin of presumption. Say no, and you have condemned yourself out of your own mouth. The notaries leaned in. Joan said, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." The record says the court was stunned into silence. They had come to break a peasant. They could not outthink her. On the 13th of May, 1431, they burned her in the marketplace at Rouen. She was 19. She asked for a cross. An English soldier, one of her own executioners, lashed two sticks together and gave it to her, and a friar held a crucifix up from the church so she could see it through the smoke. She called on the name of Jesus as she died. The accounts say the executioner went afterward in terror, certain he had burned a saint. That should have been the end of her. It was the beginning. 25 years later, with the English driven out, the case was reopened under the authority of Pope Calixtus III. In 1456, the verdict of Rouen was declared null, the trial corrupt, the charges fraudulent, the sentence unjust. And in 1920, Pope Benedict XV canonized her, Saint Joan of Arc. Her feast is the day they killed her. Hear the lesson buried in that, brothers. The church is made of men, and men can be bought, frightened, and wrong. A courtroom of bishops got it catastrophically wrong, but the church also corrects herself. Truth outlasts the men who suppress it. The same institution that failed Joan in one courtroom is the one that vindicated her in another, and then put her on their altar. Fidelity is slower than the mob, it always wins. So, what does a teenage girl from 1429 have to do with you, a Catholic man in 2026? Everything. Because she did the three things most men will not do. She obeyed a call that made her look like a fool. She put God ahead of her own life, not a phrase as a fact, in a fire. And she held her testimony in a rigged room with not one human being in the corner. Most of us will never face a stake. We fold under far less. A raised eyebrow, a group chat, a comment we're afraid to make it work. 3 disciplines this week. 1. Name your fear, then move anyway. Joan was afraid. Courage was never the absence of fear. It was obedience carried out while afraid. Find a thing you've been avoiding because you're scared, and do it this week. 2. Clean up the camp. Joan's first act at Orléans was to lead the men around her towards the sacraments. Get to confession. And don't go alone. Bring a brother, a son, a friend who's been away for too long. 3. Answer plainly and stand. When the world's experts tell you the faith is foolish, don't argue louder. Answer like Joan answered the doctors, simple, true, unshaken, and then stand there. This is what the sanctum is for. Catholic men who fear God more than they fear the room. Altar, arms, allegiance. Subscribe, and next Tuesday, the next video is in your feed. The Great Siege of Malta, 500 men who would not break. And if you want the weekly Sanctum Dispatch, one reflection, one discipline, one action for the week, the link is in the description. St. Joan of Arc, who feared no court but the court of heaven.